Okay, my friends, welcome back to what I'm hoping will be the absolute final episode of Final Fantasy VII Remake related material on the channel, barring any future like challenge runs or mod runs or anything like that that I might do for the game. There is one boss battle standing between me and completing everything I want to do in this game for now, and that is of course Weiss. And this guy basically got added in later on as a super boss, and this is one where I definitely knew in advance that this guy was going to be tough. But I was thinking to myself, I just had like maybe 3 or 4 hours of practice against like Bahamut, Ramuh, and Pride and Joy, and I thought to myself, surely my general skills have improved enough, like my dodging ability, my blocking ability, my understanding of the materia. I felt warmed up and back up to speed, and I felt like I was a better player than I was 3 or 4 hours ago. And I thought, I've got 3 characters now, and again, fundamentally, like the main game just wasn't that hard. And I was like, 3 characters plus all of this extra experience and practice now, how bad could Weiss be? And the answer to that question was very bad. Horrific. And once again, much the same as Yuffie and Sonon's boss battle against Bahamut, I kind of had to relearn the game again for Weiss, because for me, like, fighting him turned out to be a completely different way of playing the game than I basically had ever played it before. And so we will get into all of that, but what I will do is first off just show you how things went, because I defeated the top secrets in the DLC and I went straight into Weiss. I was feeling confident, and I thought, yep, like surely within half an hour tops, I'd be able to defeat this guy. Another 3-4 hours later, I hadn't beaten him yet. So yeah, definitely a very tough boss, one of the toughest that I faced. Let's see the story of me versus Weiss, starting with my very first attempt against him. So I'm not really going to show you guys any setup, any material, anything like that. This is just literally straight up my first attempt. I did what I thought might vaguely be good against him. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know if he was like, you know, a super grindy guy, a super fast guy, super magic guy, super physical guy. I had no idea what he could do. And so generally I liked fighting with Barret and Aerith, and so I went for Cloud, Aerith and Barret for this fight to start. And people who know Weiss well will already be shaking their heads thinking, you have no chance. So let's see this little scene.
They shall be slashed, strangled, and slaughtered. Beaten, stabbed, and crushed. Garroted and impaled. Shot and executed without mercy.
His hair to me is like Cloud and Sephiroth mixed together, basically, like on steroids.
Let the hunt begin!
And yes, he is on the hunt, my friends. Just check this out. If you've never seen Weiss before, he's going to look like something like basically like you haven't seen. Now, Barret doing 1 damage off the bat concerned me. I thought that is not good, and immediately an unblockable attack comes in and does big damage to everybody. He's extremely quick and extremely aggressive and extremely high damage, and we're basically doing no damage to him during this time as well. So already we are off to a nice start. Reprieve gets activated within 20 seconds of the fight starting, and I thought immediately let's try and do some magic damage, because clearly we can't really damage him with physical attacks. It doesn't seem to be working very well. So here I was like, already, like, what else can I do? I wanted to land some clean hits, so I decided to go for the whole triple slash thing here. He was not having any of that, and immediately came in with stab. Now, you know a guy is fast when even when you've pressed X and you're in the slow down mode, you can actually see him move. Like, he's so quick that it's just insane. Like, for him, one of the reasons I personally wasn't a big fan of this fight was he just felt too much to me like he almost seemed like he just didn't have an ATB. Like, generally when you fight bosses in Final Fantasy, they play by they usually play by the same rules that you do, except they're just stronger, or they have some extra kind of things that you can't do. But this guy, he just felt like he just didn't play by the rules. Like, his ability to just string attacks together and just like flow in between them, he just felt like he didn't have an ATB bar. He was just completely relentless and extremely difficult to stop. Like, his momentum was just crazy. And so already this was very worrying to me, because I thought I can't keep up. He's like some kind of anime Like, you know those, you know when you watch anime and there's always, it's always based on speed, where they like vanish and then they reappear because they're so fast. That's the vibe I got from this guy. He's just stupidly fast. And you just do not really face enemies this quick. Like, I remember Rufus, when you fight him, like, that was an interesting fight because Cloud couldn't hit him physically a lot of the time. But this is that, like, times 10. Because with him, like, you could kind of balance it out by using certain abilities. You could use magic on him, things like that. But this guy was just like, your magic doesn't really do much damage either. And so, how are you supposed to keep up? Like, he's just completely relentless, and he has like 3 or 4 attacks that are undodgeable, like the red kind of exclamation mark thing. So I was very concerned here. I summoned,
Thanks for coming
you know, just to kill some time here. There's not much point in summoning. I'm going to die anyway. But the only thing I started to notice from the very first fight was that he is extremely focused on whoever you are controlling. So he basically pretends the other two don't exist. And so I figured maybe that's something I can kind of take advantage of. And so this first attempt's going to end very soon.
I think I
Cloud's the only one left with 1 HP. He's not going to have enough time to do anything because he's just too quick. And there you go, he's dead. So he died without me doing more than like 2% of his health bar. And so I thought, yeah, that's looking tough. Like, considering the fact that I just beaten the top secrets in the Yuffie DLC, I thought surely I could have done better than that. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, how? And so the first thing I thought that maybe I could try and do was like, maybe I can like try to rotate around the characters very quickly. So have him focus on the one I'm controlling and then very quickly skip over to the other one and just basically keep diverting his attention round and round and try to do kind of damage in that way. So that was like an idea that I had, but as you're going to see in this attempt as well, like it's still not going to work that great. But you can see you can kind of just manipulate him to just go round and round, just attack each of your characters in turn, which I thought might be able to buy me some time from the characters that he's not attacking. But you can see here, I try to do a Thundaga, he gets completely taken out. You just do not have enough time to cast something like that. He just felt to me like he just had every weakness kind of walled off. Now, I did manage to do something there, and I did see it pressured, but like I just felt like I got a bit of a lucky window there. I briefly tried to dabble with Punisher mode to see if I can kind of override him a little bit, like block some of his attacks, kind of almost Elden Ring style, where you can kind of like poise that, like out-poise an enemy. I thought maybe Punisher mode might give me something like that, but just wasn't looking very good. And the damage is just so quick and so rapid. And as you can see, at this point, basically anything that has any kind of charge up time, you just can't use. He's too quick. Like, you know, Ray of the Judgment thing that Aerith can do, any like higher level spells. Even the healing is tough because you have to try and be the person that's not targeted at the time. And so it was just looking like completely out of reach for me. Like, look at his health bar. I'm making absolutely no impact at all. So I was like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, is it magic? Is it physical? Is it limit breaks? Like, there's got to be something here to be able to damage this guy. And the trouble is, like, I'm used to trying to be able to block. Basically, from the Yuffie DLC, the one attack that was kind of like the unblockable one, which was Beam Cannon, that's pretty much the only one I faced like that. I could only dodge it with Brumal Form. I had no other way to dodge it. And so I kept seeing these like undodgeable attacks. And I was like, well, there's nothing I can do here. I can't dodge any of this. Like, what am I supposed to do here? I can't roll out the way of them. I can't use R1 to block. And like 70% of his attacks are just undodgeable. I've got no time to use magic. I've got no time to do anything. Like, what the hell is the situation here? And so pretty quickly, I realized that I'm just out of my depth here. This is a different style of battle. And I'm lacking tools. Like, there's things that I don't know, and there's things that I haven't implemented that are necessary in order to beat this guy. Because whatever I'm doing right now, it's never going to work. Like, there's not a viable strategy in sight at the moment. So one of the first things I did was to basically just use like assess on him and stuff like that, just to see, does that give me any kind of clue on what to do against him. So here we go, here's attempt number 3. I was trying to just tank it a little bit just so that I could get the first ATB and cast Assess. I wasn't trying to do anything more than that. It just takes so long that, there you go. So here comes the Assess. I thought maybe this gives me a clue on how to damage him. And there you go. So, a depraved and ruthless deep ground soldier recreated in a virtual space known as Weiss the Immaculate. He reigns supreme over deep ground. And for the tips, it just says unable to read. All you know is that he is immune to basically everything. So the Assess gives you nothing. And so I was thinking, great. I was like, the eye test didn't give me anything. The Assess didn't give me anything. And this was already getting very frustrating because I'd spent hours on the top secrets and now I had nothing for this guy as well. And so already it wasn't looking too great. And I took a little bit of time to try to at least find some kind of foothold in the battle and at least survive for a little bit. And so here we go again. After I assessed, I went for another fight. I basically just immediately quit after I assessed to rearrange my materia a bit. But at this stage, what I was trying to do was basically, again, it's the old kind of Dansgo 8 way, the way that I play Final Fantasy games, the way I play a lot of games. And that is to try to establish, like, basically survive in the battle. Develop some kind of way to survive. If you've ever watched me play Final Fantasy, you'll know that if I'm facing a boss battle, especially one that I think might be difficult, I start looking into making sure I have enough HP. I try to get my buffs on so that I can survive the damage, and I generally try to debilitate the enemy if I can. I play a defensive game. Like, I play to survive first, and then once I've established that I can survive, then I play to win. And that's just generally my style. It's how it's always been. And for a lot of Final Fantasies, it works very well. I've done some pretty difficult challenges in Final Fantasy as a result of that type of mentality and playstyle. And so it's something that I'm just wired to do. And so for this one, again, I'm trying to see, like, can I get, like, haste on everyone? Can I find a way to stay alive in this fight and try to gain some ground? And what happens if I find a way to kind of just establish an equilibrium where he can't kill me and I'm damaging him slowly but surely? Maybe then we can kind of chip away his health enough to be able to actually do some damage. So you're seeing, like, steel skin here. I'm just trying to survive. This is all I'm trying to do at this point. Using lots of, obviously, healing when I can. And as soon as Aerith heals here, I'm generally swapping my character. And so right now, at least, the strategy involves a lot of swapping because there's just a lot of stuff I can't block. And because I'm not dodging or blocking anything, if I stay on the same character, they're just going to die because they're just going to keep getting hit and I can't dodge anything. And so that's why I'm constantly rotating here. Eventually, you're going to see I'm going to play it very differently. But again, you're just watching me kind of play it the way I know, what's kind of intuitive and instinctive for me. So here's a summon coming in. I thought maybe, you know, anything that can kind of turn the tables a little bit, I'm obviously going to use here because, you know, this guy's just so brutal. Again, look at his health bar. It's like 99%. So you can really just see I'm trying to juggle around as much as I can. So I thought maybe this was my way of kind of just slowing him down, like juggle around so frequently that he kind of gets just stuck between, just rotating between all of them and never gets to focus on one character enough to kill them. And so that was my initial logic of trying to beat this guy. Alas, it didn't work, but you can see already, compared to the first attempt at least, I'm surviving for much longer. And so I thought, okay, well, this is at least progress. We're doing something here. And the stagger gauge, very slow, but again, there's some progress. Maybe if I can just stay in this fight for another 5 minutes, maybe something will happen. Who the hell knows? And we've got stuff like this. It says it significantly increased the stagger, so maybe that helps, but it looks like it completely missed here, which is great. So it's just, yeah, rotate around, try to build some ATB. Don't stay on the same character for too long if you can avoid it. And then just see how long we survive based on that. That was kind of it.
You can do it.
Obviously everyone has revival material, that goes without saying. But yeah, here's like the way he just zones in on whoever you've selected. It's just almost instantaneous. Like, there's just no delay. But you can see, I mean, I'm hanging in there. Because I'm like level 50, I do have some strong materia. Like once you obviously get the hang of things a little bit, you can at least survive. But this is a battle where survival is far from enough. So here's Tidal Wave from Leviathan. Was curious to see, it's probably going to do like 5,000, 6,000 damage. And he has basically 100,000. But there it did nothing. But you can see, I mean, I'm healthy. I've got a decent amount of HP and I've still got a decent amount of MP left as well. And I managed to land a Thundaga there too. Now, it didn't do much damage, like his health bar hasn't moved. And his stagger bar looks exactly the same. And so at this point, this is what I'm saying. I'm like, how am I supposed to increase this guy's stagger? I don't understand. Because usually, like using high level spells, it tends to have quite a lot of stagger power attached to it. Like, if you're landing a Thundaga and the stagger gauge is barely moving at all, it's like, what am I supposed to do? And so I was very much frustrated and struggling here. You can see it just constantly bouncing around between the characters, doing my best to not have them get killed, but yeah. I'm just trying to see anything. I'm reading the descriptions here, seeing if any of them might offer some more damage. Like 92 damage, I think one of those blade bursts hit. That's all it could do. So, yeah. So let's see if I can get this cure in.
Can you take over for me?
Goes after me again. But you can see, I mean, I'm basically not avoiding any of the attacks, and my general philosophy of like, okay, steadfast block is great. If you can't avoid something, just press R1. Yes, you will take damage, but it's not a game designed to try to take no damage. You're obviously going to take damage, but you can just heal around it, it's fine. But when an enemy is as fast as Weiss is, and has as many unblockable attacks as Weiss does, then obviously that whole strategy goes out the window, and steadfast block kind of counts for very little at this stage. It's a good one to have for your passive characters, but because he never really attacks the passive characters, steadfast block doesn't help them either. So in general, like you're seeing, I'm staying in there, and given this is only like attempt number 4, I've survived for a long time, like longer than I thought I would. And so I thought, okay, at least we're doing something. But then a phase shift comes in. I'm like, okay, what is he going to do now? Is this going to be worse for me, or is this going to be better? Like, can I do full damage now? Because I was doing so little damage at the start, I thought maybe now is when the real damage begins. And so I thought, okay, now we're getting somewhere. But then I noticed he was immune to physical damage. And I thought, ah, shit. So let's do one of these. As he starts to rejuvenate, which lowers his stagger gauge. So brutal attacks here, but we're still alive. And the sorcery move that Aerith did do a decent amount of damage. And so you can start to see a few little gaps in his armor here. Like there's some things happening, but for example, I've got Barret now, and I'm like, well, what the hell's Barret supposed to do? Like, if he's immune to magic, this is not Barret's game. Like, he's not going to be able to add much to the situation here. I didn't really want to use Cloud's limit break because I thought he probably can't do anything with that. So I wasn't really sure. The good thing about this form is that he is way slower. You definitely have some room to breathe here. So that was something I was definitely thinking, okay, now if I play the rotation game, he's much slower to catch up to who I've rotated to. And so I actually have time to cast spells, which I thought was great. And so things were starting to look up. After like attempt 4 or so, I was finally starting to make some progress with this fight. And it gave me a little bit of confidence. So yeah, he's charging towards Aerith, but now, because things take so long, he begins charging towards Aerith, but I can change my character, and he still takes like another second or two to get to Aerith. And let's say if Aerith has steadfast block, she can reduce some of the damage. And so in this form, there's not as many of those kind of exclamation mark unblockable moves. And so I thought, okay, this phase is definitely easier for me to handle. Like, I can beat him in this phase. So all I have to do is survive when he has the blades out. And if I can do that, then this phase I can probably have a good chance of taking him out. So yeah, like a plan was starting to show itself. So then he shifted back, and I thought, ah, crap, I was doing so well in this form. Why'd you have to shift back? Like, couldn't you just stay in that form for another 5 minutes? And then this move happened.
You can do it.
My turn.
Bye-bye. Aerith had reprieve, thankfully, and I thought to myself, wait a minute, I can use Planet's Protection, because that nullifies all physical damage.
I'll help you through
And
it.
this guy has blades, right? He shifts back to this phase and he starts firing these things at me, which are magical, I guess. And so, yeah, the Planet Protection didn't help and I died. So, a lot of things happened there, but what you saw was that he used a move called Immaculate End. Everyone took quad 9 damage except for Barrett, who took 8,840 or something. I'm not entirely sure why, I forgot what he had equipped, but maybe he has a super high defense stat or he had Steel Skin or something. Unlikely, but it's absolutely huge damage. It's basically quad 9 on everybody unless you cast Barrier. That's what I found out in the end. And so that was a bit of a problem. But since I basically had made that much progress, at this stage, as you see me accidentally put an enemy skill material, that was definitely a mistake. I wasn't supposed to put that one on. The idea kind of, again, I was still stuck in the Dansgo 8 way of fighting, which means, okay, I proved that I can survive for a decent amount of time in this fight. Maybe I can optimize even better to start to survive a bit more indefinitely. And then while I do that, I can get better at hopefully doing some more damage and being able to kind of take him out. So I was like, how can I survive Immaculate End? I can probably survive it maybe like if I have some better HP plus materia and I'm able to use Barrier, so everybody has a Barrier spell and they can equip that on everybody and they can cast it on themselves before Immaculate End. All of that stuff. I started thinking of ways to survive once again. And at this stage, what I'm going to do is basically start to skip ahead because I'll show you guys some stuff in the background as I'm generally talking about it, but the next, I would say, 3 hours maybe? 3-4 hours? Was spent trying to find some kind of way to survive against this guy while obviously doing enough damage to eventually kill him. It got to a point where I started to do damage, like I got to maybe 30% of his health bar, 40%, 50%, 60%, but what I quickly realized was that Immaculate End
It's your turn.
was like a predetermined thing. Somewhere between like 4 and 5 minutes, he switches back to his sword phase and he uses Immaculate End. And so once he uses that one, it's kind of on a timer. And surviving it one time is already quite tough. Surviving it twice is very unlikely indeed. And so it became more and more of a race against time. So it took me a long time to sort of come to that realization because I always thought I could find a way to consistently survive this guy. And the more time it took, because I was making progress, I didn't get stuck at like, 10% of his health bar for 3 hours. I was making very incremental progress and I thought eventually I'm going to get there. But I really started to get a hard stop when I got to about half of his health bar. It just wasn't working. And so the longer I hung in the fight, what I also started to see was that he has a third form. This one is probably the worst one of the three because it's just so quick and it's relentless and it's just like it's got some AoE in it. He's an absolute blur in that form and there's almost no time for anyone to do anything. And I really don't like that one. And so after 2 or 3 hours kind of putting everything together, I was thinking, my approach here is fundamentally flawed. I've tried my best with this particular setup. I'm close, but I'm not quite there. And so eventually, once again, the same as the previous one, full transparency, I did look up this guy and some ideas on what you're supposed to do to be able to fight him. And then everything changed. So, from what I can understand, there's 2 ways to beat this guy. The first is doing it kind of similar to the way that I was doing it, which would involve me having even more powerful materia and setting myself up in an even stronger way. What I mean by that is, I reckon if I could have good enough HP plus materia to get everybody to quad 9, and then I could basically kind of use all of my like prayer materials, my healing materials, magnify heal, chakra, all of this kind of stuff. I think with quad 9 all round, I think I'd have a decent enough chance of surviving Immaculate End like multiple times, maybe like 3 times, 4 times. And if I could do that, I could also have weapons that have reprieve on them, and so that would give each person 1 extra revival. And so if I had quad 9 to start with, and I had everything kind of in place, then I would be more able to basically survive while kind of chipping away the damage a little bit more, and generally just sort of working my way through and turning it into more of a grindy fight. But I think that method is much more difficult because you have to stay in the fight much longer, and there's a lot more things that can go wrong. And it requires, I think, just like a more kind of hardcore, multiple HP, maxed out materia, quad 9 on everyone, that kind of thing. It's very kind of uber tanky kind of strats, and I don't think it's the best. So that feels like option 1 to me. Option 2, which I think is ultimately the better option, how I end up winning the fight, is by beating him in a race against time. And so you see this happen sometimes in Final Fantasy, and it's more of a theme when you get to the more modern Final Fantasy. So I've been doing a challenge in Final Fantasy 13, and there were like a couple of times in that game where, again, we had the same kind of 2 options. One was to try and survive for long enough and chip away the damage and grind it down and get it done. And then it was kind of like, I don't think this is working, I've tried my best to do it that way, I need to go the opposite way and try to blast this guy out before he can kill me. And so I don't think that's as much of a thing in the old Final Fantasies. I didn't really play like that. And so eventually this fight started to lean more in that direction. The 2 reasons why I kind of ended up abandoning the more tanky strategy where I tried to survive for longer, deal with Immaculate End, recover from it, chip away that health, it's because I still just couldn't find a way to charge that stagger gauge quickly enough to stagger him and really get some damage going, because he has a rejuvenation move as well, which obviously cools down the stagger bar. And so with this kind of Cloud, Aerith and Barret kind of strategy, I could fight for quite a long time, but I couldn't get over the hill. There was just that hill that I could not get over, and so there was something that was just generally missing, and I just could not understand how I was supposed to build the stagger gauge quickly. And so now, let me start talking about what I did, and the fight that you're going to see in which I beat Weiss just looks so different from any other fight that you would have seen probably in the entire LP. That's a good thing and also a bad thing, I guess, but hopefully this will help you a little bit if you are also struggling against Weiss like I did. So, let's get into it and talk about how I finally broke through and managed to beat this guy. So let's have a little look at materia/team. Now, again, I will preface this by saying, yes, I did look up some stuff, but it didn't turn into like I just copied exactly what I saw on the internet and just repeated it exactly the same as what I saw. This is obviously me trying to apply some tips and tricks that I saw about Weiss into my own file based on what like materials I had and setup that I had. So first of all, from the attempts that you would have seen so far, physical attacks don't really work too well. So I started to go to a much more magic heavy kind of setup, and so I gave my team weapons that were more magic heavy than physical heavy, and I tried to make my magic stat a little bit better. And so that was one of the first things that I did. 2, I brought Tifa onto the team instead of Barret because Tifa is much faster, and I learned that Tifa is the one character who can dodge Weiss the easiest. Once again, it comes down to that good old dodging. The thing that in general is not that necessary, it made a comeback here. Now, of course, I was already aware from the harder battles that I've done against the likes of Bahamut that dodging is a lot more important, blocking is important, but as I said, in the first form of Weiss, the fact that he had so many unblockable attacks that seemed like you couldn't roll away from them either, I was completely baffled on how I was supposed to dodge it. And it turns out that the trick was to use parry materia with Tifa. And this was basically the thing that changed the entire battle for me. I think if I didn't do this, I basically wouldn't have been able to win, and I would have been stuck. And so let's see how the fight looks when you have Tifa. So this isn't a winning attempt, but you're going to already see things are going to look very different as soon as I start to play with Tifa and start using parry. Yeah. So basically the way parry works, I didn't use it basically the entire run, and so it's not something that was much of a thing for me. The way it works is that you press R1, and then so she's in this kind of defensive stance, I guess, and then if you press circle, she kind of does this slide. And so that's generally the idea. She's so fast that if you time it correctly, the timing is quite tight, but it's not absolutely brutal. Like, she can dodge relatively consistently. Like, you don't have to be a super pro, incredibly quick player to be able to do it. You can dodge him. And of course, the main time in which this guy gives you a window to increase his stagger is if you dodge one of his unblockable attacks. And so you can see a narrative is building here. It's a very specific, high skill, good setup strategy needed to defeat him. So this is like, this made a huge difference. Every time he misses you, not every time, sometimes I would say most of the time when he misses you, he is pressured. And then you're able to strike, and you can see already in no time at all, half of his, over half of his stagger bar has already filled. And so the battle's looking very different here. Basically, I'm controlling Tifa the entire time, almost the entire time, and she is basically just working that gauge. And so she is the real MVP in this fight. Now again, you can see, because I'm not some kind of expert, I haven't been doing this fight like 500 times, I don't have 200 hours of 7 Remake play under my belt. You're still seeing it, I'm getting hit a lot, I'm making mistakes, all of that kind of stuff. But in general, you can see the idea is there. And this is how you get him out of this phase as soon as possible. Because basically, in this phase, you just can't damage him. Like, the magic doesn't do much damage, nothing really does. And so staggering him as quickly as possible was one of the first things that I wanted to make sure that I did. Because the Immaculate End still happens between 4 and 5 minutes. So this means you basically have 4 to 5 minutes before you see one happen. And so you need to stagger him as quickly as possible, do a lot of damage in stagger, change him over to the second form, which is more forgiving, and that you can do more damage with the rest of your party, and then see if you can basically kill him in 4 or 5 minutes. That's what it started to turn into. And so you can see this is my attempt to kind of try and do a decent amount of damage. And I mean, look at that damage compared to like the first 3 or 4 attempts. You can already see that, you know, I'm getting off to a much better start than I did before. So yeah, the idea remains similar here. Basically, try to focus mostly on having Tifa be the character that I'm controlling. But the other guys obviously need to build ATB, so I am swapping from time to time. But while I'm here, the characters that aren't basically being focused on, they have enough time to cast spells. And he does take a decent amount of damage from magic in this phase. And so the idea would be that Tifa would continue to basically kind of zip around, draw the fire, draw attention, trying to not get killed, while Aerith would heal when necessary, and then attack when necessary, and then Cloud would also use his like magic spells and stuff as well. Now, the trouble with this form, as you're seeing, is that sometimes obviously I'm switching over to Aerith or Cloud in order to try and build their ATB a bit more quickly, but he's still very quick to kind of snap to them, and he will attack them sometimes, and they will take huge damage. So, like, the idea is there, but executing it was proving very difficult for me at this stage. So, basically, from what I'd seen, of the 2 tactics that I mentioned, like the 2 kind of best ways to do it, I was in a bit of a no man's land in between. Either you have to start using a strategy like this one and really optimize it down to a T. Like, you prepare the perfect materia, you have the right accessories, you have the right setup, and you have the right dodging and the right timing, the right parrying, and you really blitz this guy out in literally like a minute and a half. You finish him like in a minute, 45 seconds, whatever it is. You basically kill him with the first stagger. If you can do that, then you never even see the second phase, the fight is easy, the fight is over, the fight is done. That's kind of the optimal, like, super fast speed run kind of way to do it. Then I guess like the other one is kind of doing it this way, but your survivability is a lot more guaranteed, and you're able to basically, you still have enough general power to kill him before Immaculate End happens. And this was a stage where I really thought, okay, I've kind of looked up some tips and tricks, I've definitely made improvements, I'm getting closer, but this is where it started to really get annoying, because I could get the first stagger pretty quickly, I could do some decent damage in the stagger, and I knew that by spamming like my tier 3 magic against this guy in this form, I could get a lot of damage in as well. and so I could regularly get over half of his health bar. But it seemed to me like no matter how well I did, I was just struggling to do enough damage before Immaculate End happens. And so as soon as Immaculate End starts happening, basically even if you survive, like one character has a reprieve, or you use some revival earrings and they came back, it's just like I just couldn't do it. Like once enough people have been KO'd, Immaculate End has happened and he's in that phase, or even in this phase, doesn't really matter too much. It's just like you lose too much momentum in the fight, and my characters and my setup just wasn't strong enough to survive after that Immaculate End happens. And so it started to get really annoying, because at this stage it had probably been 3 or 4 hours, and I was getting closer and closer and closer, and I just could not again get over the hill. I was still missing something. And so now let's get towards the final attempt and how I ultimately beat Weiss. So by this stage I'd completely changed my playstyle. There was no like buffs, there was no barriers, there was no like trying to tank stuff. It was all just dodging and building stagger. That's basically what it was. It kind of turned into Final Fantasy 16 almost. Basically doing the precision dodges and building up the stagger gauge and then doing as much damage in the stagger as you can. So I'm going to come to that at the end. It's not my preferred type of gameplay, but for this particular battle it really seemed to be the best way to handle this. And so here's what I ended up doing in the end to be able to win. Those of you guys that know the fight well will have noticed, of course, that one of the main things I was failing to do, even when I was starting to understand the fight and do much better, was that the stagger, the general damage output was just not good enough. And especially in the stagger, I could have done more damage and I just wasn't doing it. And so basically the final thing I needed to do was to check my setup and see if I could take things to the next level in terms of damage. And if I could do that, even if I can't sort of do it to like the perfect level and take him out during the stagger, if I could do enough damage, then it would mean that before Immaculate End I would be able to kill him off with the remainder of any spells or limit breaks or summons or anything like that. But I had to do enough damage in the first place. And so here is where things had to go up a notch in order to be able to win. So what I will show you here, just briefly before that, this was the best attempt that I had. This was the one attempt before I actually won. And you can see how close I got here. So it was getting really agonizing. I think at this stage it had been maybe like 4.5 hours, something like that I'd been fighting this guy. And I still hadn't won. And having got this close, I was just really pissed off. Because as you can see, even if Reprieve activates, like, it's just not enough. In this phase, he's immune to physical damage, so I can't use my limit break. It's pointless. And at this stage, it was just like, there's nothing I could do. I was so close, but I was just really annoyed that I just didn't have enough here. But you can see again, time 4:48. It's always like, if you're going to beat him, you need to beat him in under 5 minutes. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So, let's see the winning attempt here. And how we managed it. So, same as usual, Tifa. At this stage I started to get a lot of practice with the dodging, so I was getting better, and basically that meant that if I was getting hit early by stuff like that, I was just abandoning the attempt, because I knew I could do better than that, and you just don't want to fall behind. Like, it's all lost time. If you're taking hits from moves that you shouldn't, that's less time spent working the gauge and potentially doing damage. So anytime I had a bad start, I was just kind of restarting here. And I'm just kind of just waiting here. There you go. Pressure comes up. Give him a few hits. Now, once I have enough ATB, what I started doing was to use the fire spell. So, you saw previously that I was using like a Thundaga spell and not much was really happening to the gauge. But it turned out that the trick was to use it when he's pressured. So when he's already pressured, if you can fire off something like a fire or a thunder, then you can end up doing more work to the gauge. And so Evisceration's a bit annoying. It has to be absolutely perfect to get the pressure. Cleave is a lot more forgiving. And so if you can land a firer, he falls like that, it gives you even more of a chance. But I think sometimes the pressure was a bit too short for me to end up getting it. So I'm going to try again here. I think I just do a normal one, yeah. Just a normal one there. Sometimes that works too. But the eagle-eyed amongst you would have also noticed that I do have a synergy materia for Cloud as well. So every time Tifa uses an ATB move, Cloud is using a Thunder. So once again, it helps to get a little bit more stagger going here. So fire from her. and then a thunder came in from him as well. So when he's close to the stagger, now I'm trying my best to basically have everyone with full ATB here. And we're nearly there. Now, this is going to be far from perfect, but what I do is I cast one of these things onto here so I can basically double the amount of spells that I have. And then I use True Strike to really work the gauge. This is the one move that I could really see, just it objectively just moves the stagger gauge very quickly. And then I started spamming things like Thundaga inside the Arcane Ward thing. So in general, I'm just trying to spam as much stuff as I can here, build up the gauge as much as possible, and then obviously use like a limit at the end if I can as well. And then the limit as well. And so you can see it's all very hectic, it's all very just like mad rush to do as much damage as possible. And I'm trying to leave a little in the tank as well for the ending here. And you can see, I mean, I basically did about half a health bar. Now, again, if you get this down to a T, you have the perfect materials for it, and you've really like learned this battle very well, you can kill this guy with that first stagger. So what you're seeing here is like far from great, but basically it's going to be enough to get the job done. So now I summon Ifrit for the extra damage. And again, it's mostly Tifa. And anytime I'm able to work the ATB with the other two, I try my best to basically get a Thundaga from either Cloud or Aerith. Now the trouble here is that you can see their gauges just go up so slowly that I try to basically switch over to them now and then to work the gauge, otherwise it's just going to take too long. Thankfully Aerith did get it there, but Tifa is silenced, which is not ideal, but thankfully because the summon's out it doesn't really matter too much. But we got reprieve. But because she got hit by the bullets, she got hit a second time. Now thankfully Aerith was about to get hit by the behemoth blade thing, but Ifrit interrupted it. So this was a nice little bonus here. So Aerith saved taking any damage.
It's your turn.
There we go. So that was a nice chunk of damage from Ifrit as well. And I basically made sure I gave Tifa a Fire as well. So any chance I get, I'm using tier 3 spells. And because he's much slower in this form, you actually have enough time to fire some of those off. Eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that Cloud has the Berserk status. So it's another kind of small optimization that helps me a little bit here. I stepped inside the ward, and there you go, that did some nice extra damage for me as well. And so that arcane ward was definitely a nice addition as well. It's something I didn't use too much, because I'm always kind of running around and moving around. But if you can kind of get it right and really implement it, I think it's very nice for staggers, where like when you stagger an enemy, you cast it where the enemy is staggered, and you basically can really pound on them when they're in that form. So it's definitely looking much better. It's a similar... oh, that was unlucky. It's literally a split second there. Too slow. But I'm keeping the pressure on here. I want to make sure I get the win. I think I'd rather die now from being too aggressive than like having 2% HP left and failing. But you can see, like generally Tifa's ability to just zip around with this parry was just insane. It really helped a lot. So rejuvenation doesn't affect me because I'm not trying to stagger him again here. I'm just trying to do as much damage as possible. So at this stage it's just like a desperate rush to try and build the ATB as much as I can and just get these final spells out so that I could finish him off. Tifa's out of MP, so she's just not as helpful anymore, unfortunately, and she's probably going to die here. But I'm just really frantically trying to land those Thundagas to kill him, and you can see they're doing well. Because I have the magic focused weapons, I have stuff like Berserk. I've tried to equip materials that increase the magic stat as well. Generally, it proved to be just about enough. So I'm not even bothering to revitalize Tifa here. I'm just going for the win. Look at that damage. 2,900. And
Too bright?
there you go. So it was far from beautiful, and it was far from quick, but we got it done.
Good to know.
Yeah, I will say lore-wise, I don't know a huge amount about Weiss.
Either way, see you in deep ground.
But the whole deep ground thing is interesting. I do wonder to what extent it will be explored in Rebirth. But there we have it. Weiss was defeated. So because the battle was so fast and furious, and I kind of edited out basically a lot of the like 4 hours or so which I got my ass handed to me, it might have looked a little bit easier than it was, but trust me, this fight was brutal. And I think, like I say, for me, it just so fundamentally went against the way I generally play these games, and the way that I had been playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, that I kind of had to forget most of what I knew and just play it a whole different way. And on the one hand, it was kind of cool because you're experiencing the game in a different way. But it just, for this battle specifically, I didn't really feel like I was playing 7 Remake as much. Like it deviated too far from the formula that I personally enjoy, to make it like a really fun battle. And so I did hear a lot of people say like, oh, Weiss is like really tough. But he just, like, it's the same almost as, I was thinking of Minerva from Final Fantasy Crisis Core Reunion. Minerva was one of the hardest bosses I fought in Final Fantasy history. And yet, I feel like no one really talks about Minerva. Not because she wasn't difficult, but just because it wasn't a great boss battle. And I think just because a boss fight is tough, I don't think it necessarily makes it the best boss battle. And I think Weiss is kind of in the same boat as Minerva. Like, for me, it devolved so much into just spamming parry, dodge, parry, dodge, parry, dodge. It was literally all about dodging, timing, and just wailing on the enemy and doing as much damage as possible. And for me, at least, if you, I mean, I literally, the LP is there for everyone to see. That's just not how I played the game. And I had a perfectly good time playing the game. I had an easy enough time playing the game the way I play it. And I made a lot of progress and I had a lot of fun. And I think it's a great system. But I think the system probably has limitations in terms of difficulty with that kind of setup. And I think they're kind of forced to really play on the stagger gauge and play on the dodging and parrying when they want to make it harder. So I think when they want to take it to the more extreme kind of super bosses, they kind of have to deviate quite far from the standard Remake formula to be able to do that. And so that's great if you're into that type of gameplay. If you play a lot of like faster action games or fighters or that kind of thing, you're going to love it, and it's going to be a really different feel. And you won't be able to get enough of fights like that. But for me, that's more of a classical type player. That, like, I enjoy the battle system of Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VII, as opposed to the system of, say, 16, or games like Nier Automata. Like, I love Nier Automata, but the combat is fun, it's good, but it's not my kind of combat. I don't know, Metal Gear Rising, it's not my kind of combat. 16, it's not really my kind of combat. And so I feel like this kind of slid a bit too far into that for my personal tastes. And so I can't say I really love the battle. I've had battles harder even than this that I had more fun with. Like Melania was a harder battle than this, and I had a lot more fun fighting Melania. FromSoft, they're the masters of that. Of course, it's not really a fair comparison. But for example, the judges in Final Fantasy XII, one of the hardest, most notoriously difficult boss battles in Final Fantasy history. Probably still for me the best hard, like super boss, difficult boss battle in Final Fantasy history. I had a lot more fun with that. That one took me hours to figure out, stuff like that. So I can't say I love this boss battle, but I'm glad I got through it, and I got to see how it works. I'm more of a person that's just like, you know, force me to use buffs, force me to use debuffs, you know, force me to, I don't know, revive fallen members, force me to find a weakness that isn't purely kind of dodging and timing based and exploit it. So let's say, I don't know, an enemy's not immune to silence, or an enemy's not immune to slow, or, you know, there's some kind of attack pattern where it does a certain thing where it leaves a big window. So like Bahamut, for example, during the countdowns, it gives you a nice space to do some damage and to try and build the stagger. Stuff like that. Like for me, Weiss just didn't have enough of that. It was just so heavily reliant on, like, without the Tifa parry dodge thing, I'm not even sure I could have pulled it off, honestly. I think I would have just tried for another 8 hours, just got frustrated and just given up, I think. So it did feel like I'd like to see some fights without using parry, to see like how people have done it like without that, because especially in that first form, it feels like without parry, you're not dodging those moves. So how do you beat the first form when you can't even dodge it properly? There's always a setup for everything, but it felt to me like at the end of the day, the parry dodge thing is the thing that makes it possible. And especially with Tifa, she is so quick that I would say even like averagely skilled players like myself with this game, you would have a chance of defeating Weiss. It's not going to be easy, but it is doable. And so with that, we wrap things up. So I'm very glad I managed to do it. At the end of the day, I've basically beaten every single difficult boss of every Final Fantasy I've played on the channel. I was not going to let Weiss get away from me, even though I was having a really rough time. Especially like in the midway stage, I think. I started to make progress, but then I got stuck at about halfway. And without those other tricks that I basically had to end up reading about and learning, it would have become a total frustration and just been no fun at all. And so it kind of teetered on that threshold where I didn't really have fun with the battle overall, but it wasn't like a miserable experience. Like Minerva basically ended up being a miserable experience. I really didn't like that. Weiss is a notch above it, I guess, but still I wouldn't put it in like a great boss battle category just because it was very difficult and I had to kind of play it a different way to sort it out. So I do respect the fact that it kind of forced me to change it up and learn some new skills, and hopefully some things that I might remember to apply in Rebirth if it's still applicable. But in general, I prefer the way that I play these games, and I'll probably still stick to that a little bit more. But I guess when push comes to shove, if I'm really struggling with a boss, I guess that's another thing that I can try to have in my toolkit to make my life easier. See if I have some parry material available, see if I can start getting some perfect blocks and you know, working the stagger gauge a little bit differently than before and that kind of stuff. So I definitely learned some things and became a better player of the game as a result, but it came a little bit at the expense of having fun and playing it the way that I like to play it, and sometimes that's just the way it is. So in any case, I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you've beaten Weiss a few times already, you're already a Weiss expert. Seeing someone like me kind of put the pieces together and try to figure it out, I hope you guys found it interesting. And for anyone who's never fought Weiss before, or you've tried to fight him and you found him too difficult and you didn't like it, hopefully this has been educational and fun for you too. So I will see you guys for Rebirth next, and hopefully we will try to put some of these things into practice and see what difficult battles / potential super bosses Rebirth might have in store. So I will see you soon. Take care.